The headline says the U.S. is abandoning a fee on Strait of Hormuz shipping, implying Washington has run out of leverage or lost its nerve against Tehran. But that misses the entire point of the strategy. In 2026, the proposal itself was not about revenue. It was an asymmetric weapon designed to force Iran back to the negotiating table without a single shot fired. When Trump walked away from the fee, he did not retreat. He successfully executed a high-stakes bluff that altered Tehran's cost-benefit analysis before discarding a legally untenable position for better diplomatic leverage. The U.S. did not fail. They played a game of economic deterrence and won by knowing when to stop playing. To understand this move, we must look past the immediate reaction and examine the mechanics of modern coercion. In 2026, following the NATO summit in Ankara, the strategic landscape shifted from a simple clash of military capabilities to something far more complex. For years, analysts assumed that if Washington wanted to pressure Tehran on maritime security issues like drone swarms or mine-laying operations, it would need superior firepower. The U.S. Navy dominates the region by any standard metric. However, the conflict has evolved into what experts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies describe as a struggle of political endurance rather than a clash of battlefield outcomes. The proposed fee on cargo passing through the strait was never intended to be a genuine revenue scheme or a permanent tax regime. Instead, it functioned as an asymmetric strategic threat designed to coerce Tehran into negotiations by raising the cost of continued maritime coercion. The logic was straightforward. If Washington could impose even the threat of a financial burden that would ripple through global shipping markets, Iran's hardliners within the IRGC might calculate that their current strategy of harassment had crossed a line from profitable disruption to existential risk. By proposing this fee during the July 2026 standoff, Washington forced Iran to confront a threat it could not legally ignore or easily dismiss as empty rhetoric. This brings us to the critical pivot point where most observers miss the strategic nuance. Under international law, no single nation can unilaterally appoint itself guardian of a waterway or demand payment for transit through an international strait. The Chatham House analysis confirms that such a move was legally fragile and potentially unsustainable in court. By proposing the fee, Washington forced Iran to confront a threat it could not ignore. By abandoning it immediately after, the U.S. demonstrated tactical flexibility rather than weakness. Quick resource note: I keep a curated set of Amazon search links in the description for books, gear, and tools relevant to this channel's topics. Some are affiliate links, so I may earn a commission at no extra cost to you. Please consider supporting the channel by using those links if you find something useful. This legal reality is why walking away was not surrender but shedding an illegal burden to return to diplomacy, which remains the only path that actually works for long-term stability. If Trump had insisted on collecting this fee despite its lack of international standing, he would have invited a diplomatic crisis where Washington looked like a rogue actor violating maritime norms. The reversal signals U.S. tactical flexibility, allowing the administration to pivot back toward viable diplomatic solutions without losing face. It transforms what looks like a U-turn into a strategic masterstroke because it proves that Washington controls the board enough to know when not to make an illegal move. The decision was also driven by hard domestic constraints rather than external pressure alone. Data from Pew Research Center shows that most Americans broadly disapprove of U.S. military action in Iran as of March 2026, making even limited kinetic operations a potential political disaster for the administration. President Trump feared that any escalation involving mine-clearing missions or direct naval engagements resulting in American casualties would be politically disastrous domestically. Conversely, Iranian hardliners believe they can outlast U.S. economic pressure due to an existential threat mindset. The fee bluff was a non-kinetic attempt to break this stalemate by threatening escalation without triggering it. This context changes the narrative from one of weakness to one of calculated restraint. If the conflict were purely about firepower, Washington would have engaged in direct kinetic operations long ago. Instead, the strategy prioritized political endurance over tactical dominance. The U.S. avoided a trap that would have forced Washington into a war Americans do not support while gaining nothing legally or strategically. By treating the proposal as a weapon rather than policy, Trump achieved his strategic goal of forcing Tehran to negotiate on U.S. terms regarding maritime security without ever needing to fire a shot. The 2026 context is essential here because it marks a specific moment in time following the NATO summit, where the U.S. opted for blocking traffic to and from Iranian ports rather than direct kinetic engagement, reserving the fee proposal as a final pressure point before returning to diplomacy. This sequence of events demonstrates that the administration understood the limits of its own power just as well as the resolve of its adversary. The conflict trajectory has been defined by expectations since the July 2026 standoff began, where both sides are playing for time and political capital rather than immediate territorial gain or total defeat. The abandonment of the fee is actually the final move in a game where walking away from an illegal demand proves you controlled a board, not that you lost it. If the fee were real, international law and global shipping markets would collapse under the weight of unilateral enforcement attempts. Instead, by dropping the proposal after achieving its psychological effect on Tehran, Washington preserved its leverage for real negotiations. This approach allows the U.S. to maintain pressure without triggering a war no one wanted or any legal precedent that could undermine future diplomatic efforts in other regions. The viewer pain point here is assuming that abandoning a threat means losing influence. In reality, maintaining an illegal or unsustainable threat often erodes credibility over time. By showing they were willing to walk away from the fee once their strategic objectives were met through the shock of its introduction, Washington reinforced its position as a rational actor capable of de-escalation when necessary. This is realpolitik in action, using incentives and constraints rather than moral outrage or partisan framing to achieve geopolitical ends. The core takeaway is that U.S. strategy in 2026 was not about collecting revenue from the Strait, but about altering Tehran's cost-benefit analysis through a credible threat of economic disruption. When Trump walked away, he did so because the weapon had served its purpose and keeping it deployed would have been strategically counterproductive. The conflict has shifted to a struggle where political endurance matters more than battlefield outcomes, and this maneuver demonstrates that Washington understands how to win without firing a shot or violating international law. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I am a one-person team working hard to make each video better than the last. Subscribe if you found value. It is the best way to show support. Drop a comment with your biggest takeaway. See you in the next video.